I heard a story about a man who was trying to check in and at the airport to check his bags, and you know how that might be, that sometimes when you get there, you're running late and it's very stressful, and he is seeing the fellow who's putting his bags up there to be weighed and checking them, and he's just becoming irate, and he's just berating the man. Come on, hurry up. You're, as we might say, slow as pond water. Would you move it a little bit? I'm in a hurry. What's wrong with you? Are you not too bright? And he's just having a temper tantrum like that. And the man just keeps doing his job and sends the man on his way. And one of his fellow employees says, how in the world did you find it within yourself to be so patient with that man? He said, well, that man is flying out to Orlando, but his luggage is going to Los Angeles. Temper and having your anger out of control is a real problem. There was a very important passage that was read for us that we're going to study through today. And we're going to talk about controlling anger. I'll not ask for a show of hands, but think in your own mind. How many of you have ever had a problem controlling your temper? Have you ever blown your top and did something that was uncharacteristic of you, uncharacteristic of a Christian? Might there even be some who make that their pattern of life, that they frequently lose their temper? They frequently have trouble controlling their anger. I have lost my temper and had to apologize more than once, we'll say. How's that? Maybe lots of times. Maybe you've had that too. You've done something and you say, oh, I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have done that. I need to get control of my anger. Well, let's talk about that today as we study together. Do you ever have that time you feel like you're just boiling over like that man? You have no patience and you're just, maybe that illustrates it. How you feel and how you may respond. When you're feeling that way, you need to realize there's great danger. I thought this was interesting that anger is only one letter short of danger. And so anger is not necessarily something that's wrong. We're going to talk about that. But when we feel that start to boil up and we feel like we're going to lose control, there'll be a big warning sign to us that says, watch out, because this could turn bad. A couple of the law enforcement officers that are with us today I've heard that one of the most uncomfortable things that they have to sometimes go to are family disputes. Domestic problem. And so they arrive, and because those things, people lose their temper, can turn very ugly. Hannah was telling me about a few weeks ago, maybe a few months ago, about a woman who stabbed her boyfriend with a selfie stick. You know those things you hold out there and you can hold it out and get a nice wide view, and because he didn't like her status soon enough. Temper, it can be a huge problem. Well, what does the scripture say about that? First of all, it says that we can be angry. In fact, that comes across in Ephesians 4 as a command in verses 26 and 27. What was read for us a few moments ago, be angry. God doesn't call upon us to never have our anger aroused, to never be upset over anything. You know, it's part of how we are, it's part of who we are, and it's a right thing that sometimes we ought to be angry. Do you know God's angry at times? Maybe more than what we'd like to admit. When we read at other scriptures, we read about God in Hebrews chapter 3 and verse 17. And with whom was he provoked for 40 years? Was it not those who sinned, whose bodies fell in the wilderness? God was provoked for 40 years. Have you ever been angry? And that anger carried over? I've been angry, severely angry. Well, I'm only 49, but nowhere close to 40 years. And when we read about the characteristic of God, we read there that God, in Psalm 7 and verse 11, that God is a righteous judge and a God who feels indignation. We use that term, righteous indignation. He feels anger every day. When God sees sin in the world, He feels angry. And when I mentioned that we can be angry, there's some things that we ought to see that ought to just stir us up and say, this ought not to be so. Do you remember recently, very recently in the news, there was a little girl, I think she was 15 months old, who was abused and killed and dumped by a river. I don't know all the details or who all was involved and who all was at fault, but if you can hear about things like that and it doesn't make you angry, when you see people who treat one another with disregard for the fact that they're human beings, women who are raped and people who are beat and left either dead or left for dead for a few dollars. Sin makes God angry. And we ought to sometimes be so stirred up that we are angry. Now, some of you may say, well, Paul says I can be angry. And you may kind of go, oh, good, because, I'm really good at being angry. You might consider what it is that really makes you angry. I heard one fellow say is that your favorite television show was canceled, and so you're angry about it. Probably not the highest level there. Someone didn't shake my hand, I think was an illustration in our gospel meeting recently. Probably not. But when we see some things that are so sinful and so terrible, when we live in a land in which we see that babies, unborn babies, can be killed without any regard, that ought to make you angry. When we see that God's laws about marriage and who can be married are disregarded, that ought to make you angry. God feels indignation every day. I find that concerning. But it's not necessary that God is angry with me every day. And it's not necessary that He's angry with you every day. There is sin throughout this world, but we ought to live in a way that we don't want God to be angry with us. We don't want Him to feel His righteous indignation with us every day. But we try to overcome those things. So when you think about controlling your anger, part of it in controlling is, I need to feel angry sometimes. I need to be upset about some things. And so be angry. But he says there, don't sin. Be angry and do not sin. If you look in the context of Ephesians 4, he's telling them many things like don't steal, don't lie. Instead of stealing, work with your hands. Instead of lying, tell the truth. Don't sin. Be angry, but don't sin. That's the context of these instructions. Control it. Make sure that when you feel that boiling up inside of you, that you're careful about your words. We see in Genesis chapter 4, verses 5 through 8, that Cain there was very angry, and I've abbreviated this passage a little bit. The Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry?" Now, that's a good question. Why are you angry? Maybe one that needs to be evaluated. Why is your face fallen? And if you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. Cain spoke to Abel, his brother. And when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. You know, Cain really had no right to be angry. God says, "Why are you angry?" But what does he warn him? He doesn't say, "Don't ever feel angry." Sometimes we feel angry. But when you're in that situation, be careful that you don't take your anger to the point of sin. Here, what we read about is sin is crouching at the door, and it desires you. It wants you to be so angry that you lose it. Cain lost it. And his anger was so severe that he killed his brother. It wasn't wrong necessarily, although the anger was misplaced, for him to feel an emotion, but it was wrong with what he did with that. Jesus said in Matthew 5, "But I say to you, everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says, 'You fool,' will be liable to the hell of fire." Be careful that your anger doesn't build and build and you blow your top. When I was looking for those graphics that we started out with for anger, one of the pictures that I saw frequently was a man with steam coming out of his ears. The safety valve had been surpassed, and he was over the top. Be careful. Be angry and don't sin. Keep it under control. Look at what he says here. Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger. How can you not let the sun go down on your anger? If you're angry, he says, keep it under control. Don't let, that means that you're managing, you're controlling your anger. Don't let the sun go down on your anger. And so if you're going to start a fight with your husband or your wife, be sure to start it early in the morning so that you can fight all day. And wouldn't it be a waste to have a friend and you start a fight, just about sundown, and go, wow, I can't do that. One illustration I heard about this was a little boy who was reminded of this passage. He was fighting with his sibling, and his mother said, don't let the sun go down on your anger. And he says, how am I going to keep the sun from going down? You keep it under control. The point really isn't that anger can't carry over from one day to the next. God's angry every day. He was angry with the Israelites for 40 years. The point really is, though, that you've got it under control and that you can let things go. You don't have to stay and fight. You can be angry and you can get over it. One time I told about a man, this is a true one, told about a man who was mad at me. He was a brother in Christ, and a preacher friend said, well, he can get glad just the same way he got mad. I don't think he could, but I hope I can sometimes. I hope when I'm mad I can feel that anger, but then I can move on. The difference between controlling anger, the opposite of that would be letting your anger control you. Jesus gave some instructions about when you and your brother are at odds with one another. Go and talk to him. Get a mediator, 2 or 3 friends to go with you. Even if it's necessary, bring it before the church. Don't just let it sit and simmer and boil. I don't know that this is the case here. I surely hope that it's not, and that I have a good enough handle on things to know. But I've known of places where people sat on opposite sides of the building. Now, some of you do that. You sit on this side always, and you sit on this side. The reason they did is because they don't like the person that sits on the other side. And they had a fight. And they probably don't even remember what they got angry about. And so their anger is controlling them. Don't let the sun go down on your anger. You be in control of that. You have to make yourself aware. I'm angry. I don't want to sin, so I need to control this. I'm afraid that I've heard people sometimes brag about their anger. I really told him. I really let her have it. I just blew my top and the words just came out so fast. And they don't mean what a terrible thing I did. They kind of say it with pride and kind of pull themselves up. And having an out-of-control temper is nothing to be proud of. It's okay to be angry. Don't sin. Keep control. You be the one to let it go when it's time to let it go. Don't let things build from day to day and always looking and always viewing that person through the eyes of your anger. Has someone ever done something to you that made you angry, and from that point forward you always saw them through your anger glasses? You always viewed them in that way. I remember. You might not say it. I remember what they did. And I remember how mad I was. Do not let the sun go down on your anger. Hannah says that, picked on Hannah a lot today, haven't I? Hannah says that sometimes I get hangry. It's a word I hadn't heard before. You familiar with what hangry is? You're angry because you're hungry. When I'm hangry and I have a sandwich, usually Hannah will say, "Could I make you a peanut butter sandwich?" I have a sandwich, I get over it. You know, our anger ought to be like that. Not that we have to have a peanut butter sandwich, but that we can let it go and feel better. James says, "Know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. For the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God." You know, that's right. The anger of man, human, worldly anger, will not prompt us to do what God's will is. We can become angry like God's angry, and we can let things go. Look at what Paul wrote to the Colossians. He's given them a number of things that are associated with idolatry and immorality to put away, and then he adds this: "But now you must put them all away: anger, wrath, malice, slander, and obscene talk from your mouth." Boy, those things all go hand in hand.